What is going on, all of you indie game fans out there in the world? I'm MegaAmpster. Thank you for checking out this quick little video here. If you are a new or returning viewer, always appreciate the support. Thanks for being here. Thanks for taking the time. And I'm going to talk about something that I'm very passionate about, that I've talked about before, but we're kind of going into more of a subsection here. I love video game music. Always have loved them as long as I've been playing games, and they really add to a sense of the game itself. They really add to the experience, and I wanted to highlight some of those, just top 5 to keep things simple. Specifically, though, I wanted to go into independent game soundtracks because I think I don't know, there's something so inherently creative. Not that there isn't with like AAA games, but like there's something about indie soundtracks in particular that feels so special. So I wanted to highlight those here. A few disclaimers before we get in. When I say independent game, I'm talking about like a separate, like an independent developer. That's not like a AAA based game. Not like huge budget AAA game. Kind of an independent developer there. I know there's been some arguments there with like the Game Awards. We're not going to get into that here. So this is how I'm just laying it down here. I also will say I'm only including games I've really put a lot of time into, which is why, for example, Yooka-Laylee The Impossible Lair almost made it to this list. Did not quite make the cut just because I haven't really played the game, but I've listened to the soundtrack outside of it. It's a pretty good soundtrack. I feel like it goes hand in hand with gameplay, and you get more out of a soundtrack when you play a game with the music in the background, so not including that here. I also will say, I haven't played every indie game in the world, but I will also say, a lot of these soundtracks are not necessarily like atmospheric soundtracks. There are some really, really good atmospheric soundtracks out there. The Ori games, of course, beautiful soundtracks with Gareth Coker and the team that worked on those. Bastion as well, similar thing. And Tunic, kind of a minimalist style, similar to like how Minecraft does it. All did not make the cut just because, I don't know, a lot of soundtracks that I listen to outside of the games that I play are usually more like in your face, like pump up kind of songs. So that is going to be a lot of what you're seeing here on this list. I will just as a disclaimer, but all those games have fantastic soundtracks, very atmospheric. Like I said, they don't stick in my mind as well. It's the catchy ones that really stick in my mind. Finally, just a couple other honorable mentions that almost made it. Vampire Survivors almost included that here, came very close to making the list, but did not quite make it. Just not fully up there for me, as well as what you're seeing here, Nobody Saves the World. Those two would have been the runner-up for sure for this list. If it was a top 10, they definitely would have made it. Just not quite in the top 5, not quite my absolute top 5 soundtracks. But with that, let's jump right into it here with number 5 on this list. Now, this is, when you think, and it's one of those classic like success stories of indie games. The creator, obviously started off with this game, blew up from there, made like successor games that I have not touched, but this game in particular I have played. Some of you may know I'm not a big RPG fan, but this game definitely stuck out as something special to me, especially because of the music, and that at number 5 is Undertale. Now, listen, if this was an objective list, these are my favorite, to clarify. If this was an objective list, this probably would be higher. This release trailer is crazy, by the way. I've never seen this trailer before this. You have no idea what kind of game this is based on this, but I think it's kind of funny. The soundtrack is really, really great. Really a lot of range. Might be the most range out of any soundtrack on this list because you do have those in-your-face catchy songs. I love like the spider dance against the Spider Queen boss. Asgore, I really like his theme. Of course, Megalovania, I mean, of course, that's a given, but it's not my favorite, but it's still up there. I like the Ghost Dummy Fight song. That one's fun. I don't know. There's so many Undyne's themes, so many great like catchy songs in the soundtrack, but then you have the more like subtle ones like the Snow Village and stuff like that. That's just kind of cute, and it's a good like background noise. Like the soundtrack in this game does such a good job of complementing the aesthetics, like just the simple on the surface, I want to say, because they're not simple. There's many layers to it, but like on the surface, that kind of 8-bit sound of the soundtrack, it really does fit that vibe. And I think Toby Fox did a phenomenal job kind of combining those elements in this game. I think without this soundtrack for this game, I don't think this game would be as big as it is. I mean, Megalovania alone, right? So it's really good soundtrack. Really like it overall. Just not like my personal absolute favorite, but it's really, it made the top 5, which is great. So that is number 5 on this list. Now, number 4 is a much more, not that Undertale's old, but this is a much more recent entry. Now, this one, a little bit of personal bias in there, I'll admit. Love the main artist on this soundtrack who worked on previous Sonic games. and other properties like that. I mean, you already know where this is going, I'm sure. Number 4 on my list is Penny's Big Breakaway. Now, listen, like I said, I know this is probably personal bias because I love T. Lopes. I love his works on Mania, his few songs of Superstars, and other stuff like Shredder's Revenge. I know he worked on the Mr. X Nightmare DLC, on Streets of Rage 4, and now he's here with, I believe it's Sean Vialo, who I wasn't familiar with, but his work's great here too. Christian Whitehead even got involved in some of the T. Lopes songs. My favorite one, actually, hopefully you're listening to it now if I edit over, is one that Christian Whitehead and T. Lopes worked on together, the Palace Sneaktime Swing or whatever it's called. I think that's what it's called. Love that song. That's so jazzy and catchy. But then you have other more low-key songs and some of the different the regions in this game you go through. I don't want to say too much because I know it just came out, but like T. Lopes in particular has such a vast range that I feel like is explored more because of this game compared to something like a Sonic Mania, which, you know, still had varying areas, but a lot of those were also old songs from the old Genesis games, and T didn't have a ton of like original stuff, although he did rearrange the old ones. But here, like, he just gets to go off. Him and Sean and Christian Whitehead helping as well. It's like they just get to go off, and like I think they do a really good job of capturing that Sega Saturn era type of sound. It just T's sound fonts and like his style of music just fits this game so well, and with like going back to the aesthetic thing, they go hand in hand, right? And I think they just do a phenomenal job here. Definitely less range than something like Undertale. Like Undertale, objectively, I'd probably say is the better soundtrack, but this one just appeals to me more. I love this style of song, and of course T. Lopes being here made it fantastic. Like I said, maybe a little bit of bias, but it is there, and I am really enjoying it so far, and I'm listening to it a lot outside of playing the game currently, which I'm almost done with it actually now, but that is number 4 on the list here. Now, number 3 is a very unique one. I think this is probably, in my opinion, the most unique soundtrack on this list. It has such a style, harkening back to, what was it, the 1920s, the 30s? Let me know in the comments when that era was. I mean, you probably already know what I'm going with. It's just such a sense of style that once again goes hand in hand with the visuals, especially with this one. That at number 3 for me is Cuphead. This soundtrack is so good. It is just the style, that old like swing time style. Special shout outs to certain songs like Carnival Kerfuffle is my favorite one, I think, against the clown fight, which is really good. But there are some like against like the Blimp Lady. I remember there was the Honeybee Queen. I'm trying to pick out specific ones. The Delicious Last Chorus had really good music as well. I mean, just absolutely fantastic. The intro theme, like the Barbershop Quartet intro theme, like it's such a sense of style. This game is such a unique soundtrack. Like I think this is the most unique on this list for sure. It just goes for a certain style and nails it. It's so good. It's so good. It's not quite, you know, top of the list because there are some that just very particularly like overall the soundtrack I really like. I will say like these last 3, there are some songs that I just don't really like too much. Like some of the Inkwell Isle songs are good, but they're not like sticking in my head, you know? They're background music, you know, which is still good. It's just in terms of this list, I tend to prefer songs that stick in my head and catch on, and they just like those earworms, you know, and they stick with you. But this soundtrack definitely has a lot of those, and they're really, really good. Like you remember them. Just the sense of style with the soundtrack, hand in hand with the visuals. I love just like I'm a jazzy kind of guy, and take that as you will. And it really works for me in this game. It really, really works. And this is one of the reasons why I love Cuphead. The gameplay, but the art style and the music, oh, so good, so good. They have that sense of style and they nail it in Cuphead. So that is why it is number 3 on this list. Now, number 2, we're getting into the top 2 here. Number 2, probably behind T. Lopes, my favorite indie composer. His track record, like, he's a ton of breadth in terms of different indie games that he has worked on. This is the classic indie game, and this is, I don't know if I would say it was the classic indie soundtrack. I mean, maybe it is, but I know just the game itself is more of the classic indie game. And the soundtrack nails the aesthetic, and like, I'm not a huge chiptune guy, but this soundtrack alone really has gotten me to like chiptune a lot more. And that at number 2 is Shovel Knight. I mean, come on, it's the classic. Jake Kaufman coming through, pulling through with this soundtrack. Absolutely, absolutely love this soundtrack. Certain songs that stick out in my mind are like Propeller Knights stage theme, Mole Knight as well. I mean, just the original, the first stage in the plains. Steal Thy Shovel, is that what it's called? Or is it Strike the Earth Plains of Passage? That's the one I'm thinking of. Love that. I mean, the intro theme gives me chills when I listen to it. It's so good. It's like, I mean, it's that classic, like, Mega Man style, right? Where, like, every night has their own theme, the boss version and the level version, and they're so good. I don't know. They're so good. I debated between this and Shovel Knight Dig, because I've also played Shovel Knight Dig, and I actually really like that soundtrack as well. Kaufman once again popped off for that soundtrack. But this is like the staple. This is the classic. Like, the different nights have such great themes. Then there's fun ones too, like the Waltz of the Triple King. That one's really funny. And like the Village theme is great and super catchy still. Like, even though some of these are more ambient, a soundtrack like this I definitely prefer, because it's even like the more atmospheric songs like stick out in my mind because they're still catchy. I don't know. I just personally prefer like the catchy soundtracks. And the campfire song, like, that one sticks in my mind. That one makes me feel things, you know, sitting by the campfire. I love the Shovel Knight. I know it's probably a vanilla, boring pick, but listen, I really do enjoy this game's soundtrack. So shout out to Kaufman again. Like I said, him and Lopes are my favorite indie composers, no doubt. They are absolutely phenomenal. And Kaufman, of course, killed it with this soundtrack here. And can't wait to hear Mina the Hollower soundtrack. I don't know if Kaufman's confirmed to be on that, but I can't wait to hear more of that game's soundtrack. So yeah, all the night themes, just the overworld themes and everything just comes together and, like, overall creates a really great chiptune soundtrack, which, like I said earlier, like, I'm not a huge fan of all the time, but they really, really nailed it here. So that is why it is number 2 on this list for me. Now, number 1, this is the top of this list. And if you've watched some of my content previously, whether it's live streams or videos here on this channel, you might know what series of games this is going to be from. You may not know which game you might actually be surprised which game specifically, because this is one of my least favorite games in terms of the gameplay in this series, because it kind of takes a step back from other games that have normally a different type of gameplay style. But the soundtrack, familiar composer name who we literally just talked about, came back for the soundtrack and absolutely nailed it. That for me at number 1 is Shantae, Half-Genie Hero, though. I debated so hard. I thought about Seven Sirens, which has a decent soundtrack. I don't believe Kaufman was involved with that, though. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. It was between this and Pirate's Curse for me, and both have fantastic soundtracks. I wanted to only limit it to one game per franchise or series. And Shantae just has fantastic soundtracks. I mean, like Burning Town, classic, right? And this one has Neo Burning Town, which is a really, like, super, like, talk about pump up soundtrack, right? That version. My favorite song, hopefully you're listening to it now, is Mermaid Falls is good, but Mermaid Factory, that, if I'm looking for, like, a video game song that makes me just so freaking happy, especially from an indie soundtrack, it's Mermaid Factory from Shantae, Half-Genie Hero. But Mermaid Falls is really good. The desert area is so catchy. I mean, Shantae's always nailed it with desert theme songs, and Half-Genie Hero is no exception. You know, just like the entire soundtrack, like, I feel like there's not really a lot of atmospheric songs in the soundtrack. Like, Pirate's Curse is definitely more varied in that regard, but I love how in your face and, like, blood pumping the soundtrack is. I love it for that reason. It's just, I love it. It's so catchy. It just, like, so many of these songs stick in my mind. The Haunted Mansion area, I forget what that was called. The one where you're racing against the Ammo Baron up in the skies. Like, all those songs just stick out in my mind. The boss theme's really good. And like I said, Neo Burning Town, great remix of the classic Burning Town theme. It was so close between this and Pirate's Curse, though. I want to shout out Pirate's Curse for being an actual fantastic soundtrack, too. And while I think that game is better than Half-Genie Hero, I prefer the soundtrack of Half-Genie Hero. I think it's phenomenally good. I think it's so good. And Kaufman back at it again, of course. So I was a little disappointed he didn't come back for Seven Sirens. But, I mean, hey, Seven Sirens also has a really good soundtrack. I mean, all the games really do, but especially this and Pirate's Curse, in my mind, are the absolute peak of it. So, with that, those are my top 5 indie game soundtracks. Like I said, I have not played every indie game out there. I have not, so definitely let me know in the comments if you have a favorite, or if you didn't like any of these, or if you did like any of these. Just to recap quickly, number 5 was Undertale, number 4 was Penny's Big Breakaway, number 3 was Cuphead, number 2 was Shovel Knight, and number 1 was Shantae, Half-Genie Hero. With that, thank you so much for watching. Like I said, let me know in the comments below what your favorites are, you know, and If any of these weren't indie games, let me know in the comments below. I'm pretty sure they are, but definitely correct me. Don't get into an argument about it though. But let me know your favorite indie game soundtracks. You know, I think independent games especially, I really enjoy like looking into the composer, the individual composers. So shout out to all of them for making these amazing soundtracks. Even for like the honorable mentions that didn't make the list. Like shout out to everybody, all these amazing composers like T. Lopes, Sean Bialo, Jay Kaufman, Gareth Coker, all of these, Jim, oh, what's his name? Jim Guthrie, the one who did Nobody Saves the World. Shout out to all of these amazing artists for creating great soundtracks and like really atmospheric soundtracks for these independent games. So with that, thank you so much for watching. I will catch you all on the next video or live stream. And until then, keep supporting indie games. All right. I want to see you supporting indie games out there. They make really good games and you don't want to support the big corporations that are not, well, you can do whatever you want. But remember, big corporations are not your friends. Indie games are great. Bye.